Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the October 2022 Ordinary Council meeting. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I request everyone to please turn off their mobile phones and remind you that any recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted. Councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So, with that, welcome. Item 1 is the declaration of opening and announcement of visitors. I declare this meeting open at 2 minutes past 6 p.m. We do have an item here, attendance by telephone, instantaneous communication. Councillor Glenn Cridland is currently on an approved leave of absence from 25 October 2022 to 1 November 2022. Councillor Cridland has contacted the City requesting to attend tonight's meeting via telephone. So, in accordance with Regulation 14 capital A of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996, Council must, by an absolute majority, approve the attendance of a person not physically present at a meeting of Council by telephone or other means of instantaneous communication. The person must be in a suitable place as approved by absolute majority by Council, which must be a town site or other residential area located 150 kilometres or further from the place of the meeting. So, I would like to move that, firstly, Council approves Councillor Glenn Cridland to attend the City of South Perth Council meeting held today, 25 October 2022, via telephone in accordance with Regulation 14 capital A subsection 1 of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996, and that Council approves the Hamilton, I'm going to mispronounce this, Queanbeyan Motel, 53 Tharwa Road, Queanbeyan, West New South Wales, as a suitable place for Councillor Cridland's attendance in accordance with Regulation 14 capital A subsection 4 of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996. An absolute majority is required. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor D'Souza, thank you. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against this motion? Councillor Russell.
Just a question. Since we have confidential items on the agenda, can Councillor Cridland confirm that he's in a confidential setting?
Councillor Cridland, are you in a confidential setting?
Confidential setting.
Yeah.
I think that's what the question is.
Well, yes.
I'm in a motel room all by myself, and I assume that there's no one watching me.
Pretty sure that qualifies, doesn't it, Ms. Tucker?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So with that, is there anyone who wishes to speak against this motion? No. In that case, I'm simply going to declare it carried with no further debate. So we'll move on to item 2. Item 2 is a disclaimer. The City of South Perth disclaims any liability for any loss arising from any person or body relying on any statement, discussion, recommendation or decision made during this meeting. Item 3 is announcements from the presiding member. That's me. There's none this evening. Item 4 is attendances. Item 4.1 is apologies, of which there are nil this evening. And item 4.2 is approved leave of absence. And as previously stated, Councillor Cridland does have a leave of absence for the period 25 October 2022 to 1 November 2022 inclusive. Item 5 is declarations of interest. I have received a few this evening. The first is an impartiality interest declared by me in item 10.0.1 as my family are members of the Manning Community Toy Library. I've also declared an impartiality interest in item 10.1.2 as a number of the nominees are personally known to me. I've received an impartiality interest declaration from Councillor Celadon in item 10.1.2 as I know many of the nominees personally, and Councillor Glenn Cridland has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.1.2, as some of the nominees are known to me. I've also received an impartiality interest declaration from Councillor Ken Manolis, also in item 10.1.2, as some of the nominees are known to me. Councillors, does anyone else have any interest that they wish to declare? Councillor Navard, I did see something from you earlier.
I was just confused about the confidential item 15. I thought that would have constituted partial.
I assume you're referring to item 15.1.2. Well, it's your choice as to whether or not you make a declaration or not.
Ms Tucker has indicated that nobody else has, so I'll just go with the majority.
All right.
Thanks.
Is there anyone else?
Thanks for picking it up.
No problem.
I was confused.
Is there anyone else who wishes to declare an interest in any items on tonight's agenda, councillors? That's a no. Okay. Moving on. Item 6 is public question time. Item 6.1 is responses to previous questions taken on notice, of which there are nil this evening. And item 6.2 is public question time. So I now open public question time at 6:07 p.m. We have received 6 written submissions prior to tonight's meeting, the first of which is from Mr. Keely Hodgson of Manning. Mr. Hodgson, I welcome you to the microphone.
Good evening, Greg. Just a quick preamble so people understand my point of view. I'm in support of the RAF project, although I have some concerns regarding the financing of the project. So basically, fully in support of it, but I'm very questions I would like to put forward to the council. One, can the council please advise the City of South Perth ratepayers if the City of South Perth does not succeed in getting the full funding of the RAF project, how do they intend to pay for the RAF project, and how and will that affect the City of South Perth ratepayers now and in the future?
Thank you. Mr. Atwell?
Put my microphone on, that might help. The November 2020 Council decision regarding the RAF notes the projected self-sustainability of the RAF and the total project budget of $80 million excluding GST. It also noted that should either of these assumptions change, the business case would need to be amended for council consideration. To date, the assumptions have not changed. As the RAF will be financially viable and self-sustaining for a self-sustaining facility, there will be no impact on rates.
Thank you, Mr. Atwell. And your second question?
Questions 2. The cost of the RAF project was costed 3 years ago. This estimate was $80 million. If the City of South Perth is intending to keep to this estimate, what will the City of South Perth cut from the RAF project to keep the cost within the $80 million?
Thank you. Mr. Atwell?
Thank you. The final budget outcome for the RAF project is not known. Any decision about changes to the RAF project scope are a matter for the Council's consideration and resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Atwell, and thank you, Mr. Hodgson, for your questions. I'd now like to invite Dr. Louise Johnston of Como, if you'd like to come to the microphone, and we look forward to your questions.
Good evening, everybody. Having attended most of the public question time sessions this year, my observation is that there are fundamental elements missing in this process. That of sufficient honesty, timely, logical, detailed and transparent communication about much of the city's business in hand. Public question time presupposes there's also a public answer time. People who feel excluded or lack information that they consider important to themselves and their lives become anxious, angry, and even aggressive in their attempts to obtain it. Rumours spread fast and well-intentioned citizens lose their respect and support of their colleagues. My questions are, does the City of South Perth believe that its business should be conducted in a democratic way? In other words, a way that is open, transparent, inclusive, detailed, honest and clear?
Thank you. Mr Bradford?
Quite simply, yes.
Number two, is it possible that the city can improve its level of communication with all those involved so that greater levels of transparency, responsiveness and inclusiveness are achieved?
Thank you. Mr Bradford?
Thanks for the question. The city is always looking to improve across all areas of our business, and that includes communication and engagement, and particularly providing transparency. I'd be happy to, if you want to provide us with feedback on any specific instances or suggestions on where you believe we haven't achieved it or where we could improve, I'd welcome them, even if you want to come and have a chat to me afterwards or whatever.
Thank you very much. Number three, would it be possible for the city to use some of the many tools available to provide timely, transparent and detailed reporting to stakeholders on its business intentions and plans, as well as its project successes and setbacks?
Thank you. Mr Bradford?
Thanks for the question. We already use a number of communication channels, and so just, to update stakeholders in the community, so we've got the Peninsula Snapshot e-News, that goes out fortnightly, the Peninsula magazine, which goes out bi-monthly, the city's website, social media, Your Say Perth, the annual report, media releases, and other plans and project updates. So we put a lot out there already, but again, if there's any suggestions you've had, I'd welcome them.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your questions.
Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Ms Kay Poe of Como, if you'd like to come to the microphone. And we look forward to your questions.
Good evening, everyone. In the previous council meeting, and in response to the questions I asked about the management order of Collier Reserve, Ms. Tucker indicated that the management order was amended at the request of the city in 2019 to allow them to, and I quote, formalize a long-standing agreement with Wesley College to use Collier Reserve under a long-term lease or license up to 21 years, subject to the approval by the minister. The city has previously indicated in the November 2020 Ordinary Council Meeting Officers Report that if the proposed WASP hockey facilities at Collier Reserve are approved, it would need to formalise a license or lease agreement with Wesley College. Can Ms. Tucker please advise whether this is the long-standing agreement she was referring to?
Thank you. Ms Tucker?
Thank you for the question. No, that's not the agreement that was being referred to at the Ordinary Council meeting back in September. The long-standing agreement with Wesley College actually relates to the use of the Collier Reserve and the pavilion by Wesley College for the school to use for sporting activities and recreation. So the officer comment made in the November 2020 Ordinary Council meeting states, if approved, it's anticipated the city would formalise a lease licence agreement with the club, and that was referring to the Wasps Hockey Club. It should be noted that the Wesley College and Wasps Hockey Club are two separate entities, and as such, they've both got unrelated individual uses of those city reserves.
Okay. Based on your explanation, the previous management order gave the city the authority to hire out the reserve, but not the power to provide long-term license or lease agreements to third parties. So without the amendment, the WASP proposal cannot be approved at a later stage. Is my understanding correct?
Ms Tucker?
The city can actually request at any point from the minister the power to lease or licence a piece of land which is currently under a management order that the city has control of. So that's under the Land Administration Act. So the power to lease or licence Crown land is issued by the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage, so we can request that at any time.
Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I'm aware, the amendment of the management order was requested by the city and approved by the DPLH and the minister without prior council approval. Ms. Tucker, you stated that all leases and licenses for the reserve is subject to ministerial consent, but you didn't say whether a council resolution is also needed. Can I please verify or clarify whether the latter is also required?
Ms Tucker?
So under the Land Administration Act, the minister is required to grant approval prior to a local government granting a lease or a licence. So that's applicable over any Crown land which the city has a management order over. So whether a council resolution is required prior to leasing or licensing that portion of land, it actually varies according to the circumstances, and in some cases, leases can be approved under a delegation by the CEO or from council. Additionally, under the local law, there's a power for the CEO to issue licences. So it depends on the circumstances.
Okay, cool.
Thank you, Ms Tucker, and thank you for your questions. I'd now like to invite Mr Peter Scott of Como. Welcome you, and we look forward to your questions.
Good evening, everyone. I've lost my questions. I look like I've misplaced my questions. Perhaps I could regroup and come another.
Perhaps I'll call you after the other
that'd be
questioners
great.
have
Thank
made
you
an
very
appearance
much.
then.
Thank you.
All right. In that case, I'd like to invite Mr Trevor Hill of South Perth to the microphone. We look forward to your questions. That's good.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Good evening, councillors and council officers. My preamble is, it's common knowledge that last month's Ordinary Council meeting, a petition was lodged by Mr George Watts, and a motion to accept the said petition was defeated 5 votes to 4. Resulting discussion around this petition and other points about the progress of the RAF project have given rise to numerous negative comments about our council and our councillors. In my humble opinion, some of those comments have bordered on being slanderous. Even comments made in deputations to this council have been disingenuous towards councillors. My questions are, has the City of South Perth provided support or counselling to any councillor who may feel intimidated or pressured in any way that may lead to them limiting their personal ability to fairly discharge the duties and obligations required of them?
Thank you. Mr Bradford?
Thanks for the question, Mr Hill. The City works with, supports and provides advice to councillors on a number of levels. Support or advice provided to a councillor regarding their personal circumstances is typically done on a confidential basis and not able to be discussed publicly.
Thank you. Excuse me. Second question, what measures has the City taken to address the negative sentiments expressed by some local mainstream media outlets and social media, especially that which borders on bullying and harassment of 5 of our councillors who have voted against receiving the petition and who are just discharging the duties and obligations required of them?
Thank you. Mr Bradford?
Thanks again for the question. The City doesn't control what media outlets report or what people publish to social media. Often we're not even aware of what social media posts have been made. If a councillor feels that a media story or social media post is inappropriate in terms of its impact on them, then there's a number of options that are available to them. Everything from making complaints about the publisher or taking legal action. Particularly informative to that is Walga have published a guideline to local government council members on the use of social media. And I'll just quote from that. And it says, if a council member becomes the subject of bullying or harassment, it is a personal civil matter, which may be subject to defamation or other legal action. The Work Health and Safety Act does not apply, as council members are not employees of the local government.
Thank you very much. My last question, is it normal practice for a CEO or mayor to advise a community member on the wording or suitability of a petition before that petition is submitted to council?
Thank you. Mr Bradford?
Yes, members of the public often seek advice from the City on local government processes, procedures and compliance with policies, etc. And this is often done either directly with officers of the City or via elected members.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you for your questions. Councillors, I'm conscious that we're getting close to the 15-minute mark for public question time, so I will move a motion that public question time be extended for another 15 minutes. I can see that Councillor Choi is seconding that. Councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Cridland, which way do you intend to vote on that one?
I would vote in the affirmative to extend the question time.
Thank you very much. That was unanimous, so the time has now been extended. I'd now like to invite Ms Tracy Destry of Manning to the microphone. welcome. We look forward to your questions. I do note there's a little bit of a preamble there. It's probably a tiny bit long. If you can summarise that as much as possible, that would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think my preamble probably equals the length of some of the questions. But I have shortened it for you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr Mayor, councillors, administration, Mr CEO. The WA Salaries and Allowances Act 1976, Part 8, provides for the extent of expenses to be reimbursed to elected members. Section 8.23 defines the extent to which elected members of a local government can be reimbursed for reasonable travel costs, as referred to in Regulation 31(1)(b) of the Local Government Regulations. It states, if a person lives or works in a local government district or an adjoining or an adjoining local government district, the actual cost of the person to travel from the person's place of residence or work to that meeting and back is covered. Notably, this does not provide for reimbursement for travel where the member travels from work to a meeting and then on to their residence or vice versa, but only when the trip is a return trip for work or for home is made. This is consistent with the ATO provisions, where the reimbursement should not duplicate the normal travel that an elected member or individual would travel from their place of work and their home, that is day-to-day work-related journey travel. I refer to agenda item 10.4.1, listing of payments September 2022, page 133, reference 13225.899, which I note is a reference that's referred to several times. However, this is for the date of the 15th of the 9th, 2022, to the value of $1,308.22 for mileage reimbursement for Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Using the SAT approved reimbursement rates and assuming this travel is all within the metropolitan area, at best, for a large vehicle that would equate to 1,392 kilometres. At greatest, over 2,342 kilometres for a small vehicle. The value of this claim equates to approximately 5% of a councillor's annual allowance. Other claims have been made which have been significantly less. In the interests of transparency and accountability, and with due respect to the permitted reimbursements for elected members, my questions to the city are, could you please clarify the period for the the period that the reimbursement claim relates to? Is it the month of September 2022, the whole of 2022-23, which I'd note is the first quarter from June to September, or is it for mileage outside and or including 2022-23, such as previous financial years?
Thank you. Ms Tucker?
Thank you for the question. This claim relates to the period October 2019 to June 2022.
Thank you, Ms Tucker. And your second question, Mr Stree?
Thank you. Is Councillor Brenda Abrandis formally appointed to represent council on any internal or external committees other than council or the Audit, Risk and Governance Committee?
Ms Tucker?
Councillor Brenda Abrandis is a committee member of the CEO's Evaluation Committee. As you've mentioned, he's also a member of the Audit, Governance and Risk Committee, and until recently was also a member of the Property Committee. That Property Committee was abolished in September this year.
Thank you. And my final question is the payment of council or city staff travel reimbursement included in the City of South Perth's audit protocol for 2022-23 or at any time in the normal current 3-year audit cycle?
Thank you. Ms Tucker?
Yes, thank you. So the city staff expenditure, so that includes things like salaries, wages and reimbursements, and also elected member expenditure, which includes meeting fees, allowances and reimbursements, is audited annually as part of the annual external audit, which is performed by the Office of the Auditor General. The adopted strategic internal audit plan for 2021-22 through to 2025-26 also makes allowance for an internal audit of HR payroll during the periods covered by that plan. For the city, if there's any claims that the city receives and we would like some clarification on, we generally go to the DLGSC to see if the claim is eligible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Tucker, and thank you, Mr Street, for your questions. Mr Scott, are you available for your questions now? Very good.
My apologies for that. A preamble. According to my calculations and based on the financial data that's been reported in the city's financial statements, the Collier Park mini golf facility is currently showing a simple payback period of 10.87 years. If a 2.5% interest rate is applied to the calculation to recognise the time value of money, the payback period becomes 12.84 years. This is a far cry from the 6 years the councillors were told that the payback would be when they were asked to approve a $2 million expenditure. My first question, on previous occasions when asked about poor performance of the mini golf, city officers have refuted this claim. Will the city officers carry out a full post-investment review of this project in order to accurately report to council on the actual payback being achieved?
Thank you. Mr Atwell?
Thank you, Mr Scott. The original budget case approved by council calculated the payback period based on forecast revenue. The business case assumptions, along with actual revenue generated, are published every month in the city's monthly financial reports. The mini golf facility is a new facility which in its first full year of operating generated $259,000 in revenue, suggesting a 7.7-year payback on investment. It should also be noted that only the direct revenue from mini golf is reported and not the additional revenue generated from food and beverage sales attributed to the mini golf clients.
Thank you, Mr Atwell. Your second question, Mr Scott?
Question 2. Who is accountable for determining the projected revenue and incorrect payback period that the council relied upon to approve the officer recommendation to spend $2 million on the mini golf project?
Thank you. Mr Atwell?
The mini golf outcomes to date are not fundamentally different to those assumptions modelled in the business case. It would be preemptive to think that the future mini golf revenue targets should not be based on just 1 year of operating figures.
Thank you. And your third question, Mr Scott?
The third question is, if the expert advice used to predict the patronage of the mini golf facility got it so wrong and told the council the payback would be 6 years as opposed to the likely 11 years, how can the city be confident that the projections of the revenue for the RAF used in the business case are not also well overstated?
Thank you. Mr Atwell?
Thank you, Mr Scott. The city engaged several reputable and recognised industry experts to assist with the development of the RAF business case documents. The documents have been independently reviewed by Deloitte and found to be sound with no fundamental flaws, which prevent the RAF project progressing to future stages. Deloitte also noted the comprehensive planning process that the city has undertaken for the RAF project.
Thank you, Mr Atwell, and thank you, Mr Scott, for your questions. All right, so that's all the questions that I've received notice of. Are there any late questions in the tray? No, there's not? Okay. In that case, I now close public question time at 6:30 p.m. Item 7 is confirmation of minutes and notes. Item 7.1 is minutes, and item 7.1.1 is ordinary council meeting held 27 September 2022. So I'm looking for a mover that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held 27 September 2022 be taken as read and confirmed as a true and correct record. Councillor Brenda Brandis, thank you. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Russell, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Cridland, how do you vote on that one?
I affirmative.
Thank you very much. So that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. I now move on to item 7.2, which is notes of briefing. Item 7.2.1, I note I'm calling for a mover. That council notes the following council briefings and workshops were held. 7.2.1, council agenda briefing dated 18 October 2022, and 7.2.2, concept briefings and workshops. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Choi, thank you. A seconder, please. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Cridland?
I vote in the affirmative.
Thank you. And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. We move on to item 8, which is presentations. Item 8.1 is petitions, of which there are nil this evening. Item 8.2 is gifts and awards presented to council, of which there is nil this evening. Item 8.3 is deputations, and deputations were heard at the council agenda briefing held 18 October 2022. We turn now to item 9, which is method of dealing with agenda business. I wish to advise that the following agenda items are new reports and were not presented to the council agenda briefing held on 18 October 2022. Those items are item 10.4.4, Metro Inner South Joint Development Assessment Panel Member, and item 15.1.2, Councillor Code of Conduct. I also wish to advise that Councillor Mary Choi has withdrawn item 12.2, Notice of Motion, entitled Policy and Fact Sheet for Petitions. I'll now seek confirmation from the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Mike Bradford, that all the report items contained in tonight's agenda were discussed at the October Council agenda briefing.
With the exceptions you've noted, that is correct, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. So, with the exception of those items to be withdrawn for discussion, reports will be adopted by exception resolution. And by that, I mean the officer recommendation will be adopted as is, without discussion or amendment. The following items have been withdrawn for discussion this evening. Item 10.3.1, proposed 7 times 4 and 5 storey grouped dwellings, lot 229, numbers 112 Lockhart Street and 11 McDougall Street, Como. And the reason for that is Councillor Stephen Russell has an alternative motion. Item 10.4.3, which is entitled Elected Member Superannuation, has been withdrawn. And the reason for that is it needs a council position. Item 10.4.4, which is Metro Inner South Joint Development Assessment Panel Member, has been withdrawn. The reason for that is an appointment is needed. Item 15.1.1, former Manning Library, 144 Manning Road, Carrawarra, has been withdrawn. The reason is an absolute majority is required. And item 15.1.2, Councillor Code of Conduct, has been withdrawn. Reason being it's a new report. Councillors, does anyone wish to withdraw any other items for discussion this evening? That's a no. In that case, I'll now call for a mover and a seconder to carry the following items by exception resolution. That's item 10.0.1, proposed licence agreement for Manning Community Toy Library Inc. located at Manning Community Centre. Item 10.1.1, City of South Perth Arts Advisory Group 2021-2022 Annual Report. Item 10.1.2, City of South Perth Volunteer of the Year Awards, Assessment and Recommendations for 2022. Item 10.4.1, Listing of Payments September 2022. And item 10.4.2, Monthly Financial Statements September 2022. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Sullivan, thank you. A seconder, Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Cridland, how would you like to vote on that item?
I vote in the affirmative, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. So that's unanimous. So those items have just been passed by exception resolution in accordance with clause 5.5 of the City of South Perth Standing Orders Local Law 2007, and the officer's recommendations have been accepted by council. We'll now be moving on to those items identified to be withdrawn for discussion, and the first of those is item 10.3.1, proposed 7 times 4 and 5 storey group dwellings, Lot 229, numbers 112 Lockhart Street and 11 McDougall Street, Como. We do have an officer recommendation, but I am conscious that Councillor Russell does have an alternative motion. Councillor Russell, did you wish to move your alternative motion first? If you'd like to read your alternative motion then, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. That pursuant to the provisions of the City of South Perth Town...
How might we address that, governance team?
Yes.
Is Councillor Cridland's phone not on mute at the moment? How are we going to deal with that if Councillor Cridland wants to speak? Because it wasn't doing that a moment ago. Yep.
What if I quack it? Apparently you don't get an echo there.
That's new information for me, Councillor Russell, but that's good to know. Are we good? We're good. Okay. Councillor Russell, if you'd like to continue.
Okay, thank you, Mr Mayor. That pursuant to the provisions of the City of South Perth Town Planning Scheme number 6 and the Metropolitan Region Scheme, this application for planning approval for the 7x4 and 5-storey group dwellings at Lot 229, numbers 112 Lockhart and 11 McDougall Street, Como, be refused.
All right. We'll see if there's a seconder for Councillor Russell's alternative motion. Does anyone wish to second that motion? Councillor Navard. Councillor Russell, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Navard. The reasons are as follows. 1. The City has noted that the proposed development includes 3 dwellings that are 5 storeys in height, which is greater than the prescribed height limits of 4 storeys. Clause 67(2) of the deemed provisions for local planning schemes in planning and development, local planning schemes regulation states, in considering an application for development approval, the local government is to have due regard to the following matters to the extent that, in the opinion of the local government, those matters are relevant to the development, the subject of the application, subclause A, the aims and provisions of this scheme, in this case, the Town Planning Scheme 6. As TPS 6 7.8 states that the power of discretion shall not be exercised by the local government with respect to building height limits referred to in clause 6.1a, and as clause 6.1a 10b refers to the building height limits of the Canning Bridge Activity Centre Plan, then no discretion is allowed. Hence, this proposal cannot be approved on this basis. Furthermore, clause 67(1)(b) of the deemed provisions for local planning schemes in planning development, local planning schemes regulations notes, development approval cannot be granted on an application for approval or development that otherwise does not comply with a requirement of this scheme unless 1. This scheme gives the local government discretion to waive or vary the requirement or to grant development approval despite non-compliance with requirement, or 2, the development is permitted under a provision of this scheme in relation to non-conforming uses. Now, as the development does not comply with height restrictions set out ultimately by the scheme, and as subclauses 1 and 2 are not valid, then approval cannot be given under the regulations. Notwithstanding the non-discretion interpretation, the vision for H8 to H4 transition is covered under the Canning Bridge Activity Centre Plan Requirement 3.8, whereby for a H8 building across the road from a H4 building, then the H8 building shall be designed to reduce undue impact on the residential street by being limited to a building height of 20 metres for that part of the development within 5 metres of the street boundary. That is, the CBACP only considers the H8 building's scale and form near to the street to be built down to meet transition. There are no provisions for the H4 building to be built up to meet an across the street H8 building. The proposed development is therefore considered not meeting the H8 to H4 transition of the CBACP and therefore the vision of such. I'll skip the footnote. Point 2. The Canning Bridge Activity Centre Plan Requirement 1.15 states that in Q4 development be designed in accordance with Residential Design Codes Volume 2, Element 4.9, in respect to universal design. An acceptable outcome of Element 4.9 is that a silver or platinum level of the livable housing design guidelines be incorporated into the design. The application makes no reference to these guidelines and how its elements are incorporated into the design. Furthermore, as the West Australian State Government is not a signatory to the National Construction Code 2022 provisions for livable housing design for all new dwellings, such as being proposed, then it is, in my opinion, essential that where current planning instruments require livable housing, then these should be applied. 3. The CBACP Q4 refers to the provisions of Parts 3 and 4 of the Residential Design Codes Volume 2, which includes 3.3, tree canopy and deep soil areas, and 4.12, landscape design elements. These elements, which detail amongst other items the locality and quantity of deep soil areas and the proposed size and species of new trees, are typically covered within a landscape plan. The Residential Design Code Annex 5 notes that a landscape plan is an appropriate material when submitting a development application. A landscape plan has not been furnished by the applicant, and therefore these elements cannot be appropriately considered by this council. Furthermore, the applicant's arborist report is incomplete, as it does not report on 2 on-site trees. The Residential Design Code Volume 2, Element 3.3, tree canopy and deep soil areas, Objective 3.3.1 states, site planning...
Councillor Russell, sorry to interrupt, that is 5 minutes. I am happy to move a motion that you be granted a further 5 minutes. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Choi, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. Councillor Cridland, how do you vote on that one?
I vote in the affirmative, Mr Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councillors, that was unanimous. Sorry for the interruption. Please continue, Councillor Russell. You have a further 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. No problems. I'll just start from that paragraph again. Furthermore, the applicant's arborist report is incomplete, as it does not report on 2 on-site trees. The Residential Design Codes Volume 2, Element 3.3, tree canopy and deep soil areas, Objective 3.3.1 states, site planning maximises retention of existing healthy and appropriate trees, which is met by acceptable outcomes A3.3.1 and A3.3.2. Without a complete arborist report, then it is indeterminate if the element objective or potential alternative solutions to satisfy this objective is being met. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillor Navard, you're the seconder. Would you like to speak? In that case, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the alternative motion? No. I might ask a couple of questions. I have read Councillor Russell's alternative motion. If I've understood the alternative motion correctly, one of the arguments for refusal is that the deemed provisions say that council must have due regard to TPS 6, Town Planning Scheme 6. Clause 7.8 of TPS 6 states that the power of discretion shall not be exercised by the local government with respect to building height limits, referred to in clause 6.1 capital A of TPS 6, and then clause 6.1 capital A subsection 10 subsection B of TPS 6 refers to the building height limits prescribed in the Canning Bridge Activity Centre plan. So if I've understood Councillor Russell's alternative motion correctly, it argues that on that basis no discretion on building height is allowed. So this is my first question, and I think it's to Ms Mullen. Is that reasoning correct? I thought that the deemed provisions stated that council was obliged to have due regard to those clauses of TPS 6, as opposed to being obliged to follow those clauses of TPS 6 with no exceptions.
Thank you, through the chair. That's actually correct. Council is required to have due regard to the clauses of TPS 6.
Thank you. My second question is whether or not the relevant building heights have actually been exceeded I could be wrong. My understanding was that the proposed development was within the permitted height in terms of metres, but the development was deemed to have 5 stories rather than 4 due to the roof terraces having a non-permeable roof covering. Is it the height limit in metres or stories that's relevant for our purposes, or is it both?
Thank you, through the chair. It's in fact both, and again it goes back to the point that council should have due regard to the elements contained within the activity centre plan. So it's both. You would have due regard to.
Thank you. And my third question is, was there anything raised in Councillor Russell's alternative motion that would change or alter the officer recommendation?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. No, there are no issues raised that would change the officer recommendation. Thank you.
All right, thank you. In that case, I will foreshadow that if the alternative motion fails, I will move the officer recommendation. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak for the alternative motion? Councillor Russell, you've spoken, so I'm assuming that's a question.
Yes, it is. Thank you. So I'd just like to refer to the RAR associated with a recent DAP approved development across the road, which is the corner of Lockhart and McDougall. So a letter from the applicant to the city, which is referenced GRFLKT DA, dated the 9th of February 2022, noted the following city officer's statement to the applicant. You are seeking a variation to building height under CBACP, being the lift shaft exceeding 3 metres above the FFL of the roof terrace. If the building height is not able to be reduced to within the 3 metre exemption limit, the city is not able to look at recommending approval of the application, as there is no discretion within the TPS 6 to vary building height requirements. So I just need to repeat that. The city officer is stating there is no discretion within the town planning scheme 6 to vary building height requirements. That's in an RAR. So I'm finding it a little bit difficult to reconcile this statement to the city's current position with this development application. Could the city please clarify this discrepancy?
Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the chair. Unfortunately, I don't have the document in front of me that Councillor Russell is referencing. I wasn't given prior notice of that particular point, and therefore don't know. I don't have the context in which that comment was made. I'm therefore not able to answer the question. Thank you.
Councillors, was there anyone who wishes to speak for the alternative motion? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I've got a couple of questions before I speak either for or against, if that's okay. The first question was similar to yours in relation to the discretion with the building heights. So I think that's already been answered, and that the councillors have due regard. It's not mandatory not to have that discretion. That's correct? That's what was...
Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the chair. That's correct. It's due regard must be given to the document.
Yeah, okay. And in regards to the landscape plan, is there a reason why, is there anything that you can add to the reasons why there was no landscape plan finished by the applicant, please?
Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the chair. As I explained at the agenda briefing, it's not unusual for officers to request a landscaping plan as part of a condition of a development if it's considered that this matter can be addressed at that stage. Thank you.
Just on that point, on point 3 of the alternative motion, it is noted that the site is actually fully cleared, so there are no trees on the site at the moment.
Thank you. Did you have further questions, Councillor Choi, or did you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just one last question, and then I'll state whether I support or not, if that's okay. So in relation to implications, what are the implications, if any, for this alternative if endorsed by council, please?
Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the chair. If the recommendation is endorsed and the application is refused, the applicant may choose to seek a review of that decision through SAT. With a decision being made contrary to officer's recommendation, that would require a consultant to be appointed to represent council in that particular SAT matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. And Councillor Choi, you're speaking for or against the alternative motion?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Ms Mallon and Ms Lummer for answering some of those questions. Look, I do think Councillor Russell's motion has merit, in particular around the discretion of the building heights. And yeah, so I will be supporting this this alternative motion. Thank you.
All right. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against? No. Councillor Cridland?
Yes, hopefully you can hear me. I picked up most of that debate there. I asked a question last week at the agenda briefing in respect of where is the discretion to adjust the height so that we can have a 5-storey building over 16 metres in this area. And I received the response from Ms Mullen that the relevant ceiling is 16 metres and the 4 storeys is indicative. As I understand it, it's not an issue of whether it's 3 storeys or 6 storeys. It's about making sure you get within the 16-metre ceiling. And the advice of Ms Mullen was that the building does not exceed 16 metres. Given that we have a height cap of 16 metres and it's within that, notwithstanding it's 1 more storey than the indicative number of storeys for this area, I don't feel that I'm able to oppose this development, irrespective of whether or not I think it's desirable. I don't think I can oppose the application.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillors, is there anyone else who wishes to speak either for or against the alternative motion before us? No. In that case, Councillor Russell, you have 5 minutes to wind up if you'd like to.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I'm going to talk to 2 points on this. One is regarding this 16 metres limit. So I'm going to read this footnote now. So it must be noted that the 16-metre NGL height limit is not a singular limit in itself. It is to be used with the 4-storey limit to ensure that no 4-storey development exceeds 16 metres. For example, 4 storeys of 5-metre heights each, resulting in a building height of 20 metres, is in non-compliance. So it's not a 16 metres in itself, in isolation. It's to prevent a 4-storey building exceeding 16 metres. The second point is regarding the due regard. Due regard is with regards to the deemed provisions 67 subclause 2, where a local government have to have due regard to such things as local planning policy, structure plans, any state policy, let's have, what else is there? Heritage, amenity to the local environment, traffic impact. What we need to consider is the deemed provisions 67 clause 1, which I've already stated, and I'll state again, is 67(1)(b), where approval cannot be granted on an application for approval of development that otherwise does not comply with the requirement of this scheme, town planning scheme, unless this scheme gives the local government discretion to waive or vary the requirement or to grant development approval despite non-compliance with the requirement, which it does not allow discretion, or 2, the development is permitted under the provision of this scheme in relation to non-conforming uses, which is not valid in this case. So, on those 2 points, there is ample opportunity and ample provision to refuse this application, and therefore that's why I think that council should support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillors, I'm now putting this item to the vote. We're voting on Councillor Russell's alternative motion. Please cast your votes. And Councillor Cridland?
I vote in the negative.
All right, so the alternative motion was carried 6 votes to 3. For the benefit of those who are listening in via YouTube, the votes were as follows. In favour of the alternative motion was Councillor Brenda Abrandis, Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Manolis, Councillor Choi, Councillor Navard and Councillor Russell. Against were myself, Mayor Greg Milner, Councillor Saladin and Councillor Credland. We now move on to the next item withdrawn for discussion this evening, which is item 10.4.3, elected member superannuation. This one's a little bit unusual because we don't have an actual officer recommendation in front of us. The officer recommendation simply reads that council supports or does not support the position carried at the WALGA annual general meeting that superannuation should be mandatory for elected members of Band 1 and Band 2 councillors and optional for Band 3 and Band 4 councils. So I'm going to ask if anyone wants to move the officer recommendation, and if so, say whether or not they support or do not support the position carried at the WALGA annual general meeting. Do we have any movers? Councillor Saladin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will be supporting the motion.
Thank you. We'll just see if we've got a seconder. Does anyone wish to second that motion? Councillor Navard, are you trying to activate your microphone?
Yes, I am.
Yep.
And yes, I'll support it.
All right. Yep. So just to confirm for those that are listening, Councillor Saladin and Councillor Navard is seconding a motion that council supports the position carried at the WALGA annual general meeting that superannuation should be mandatory for elected members of Band 1 and Band 2 councils and optional for Band 3 and Band 4 councils. Councillor Saladin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly, WALGA did a paper on this a few years ago, and one of the outcomes was, on balance, to achieve the objectives of the superannuation system and to avoid politicisation of decision at a local level, payment of superannuation should be universal entitlement for elected members, and therefore a requirement of the local governments contained in the Local Government Act. So I support this. If at any stage it does come in, then we as a council can always choose to reduce our meeting fees to make there to be no change. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Saladin. Councillor Navard, anything to add as seconder?
I think it's a great idea because it encourages people of all kinds of and persuasions to have an opportunity to become a councillor, and for that reason I would endorse it.
Thank you. Councillors, does anyone wish to speak against that motion? Councillor Credland?
No, I don't wish to be heard either way. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Well, if no one's speaking against, I'll simply declare that motion carried, and we'll move on to the next item, which is item 10.4.4, Metro Inner South Joint Development Assessment Panel member. Once again, we've got an officer recommendation before us, but it does require us to fill in the blanks to a certain extent. I'll advise the council that I have spoken to Councillor Saladin prior to the meeting. He's indicated that he is willing to put up his hand to become a full member of the JDAP, and I'm willing to move a motion to that effect, but that does leave us short an alternate member. So if someone does want to put up their hand to be an alternate member at the JDAP, if you put up your hand now, I'll incorporate that into the motion that I move. Is there anyone who wishes to become an alternate member? That's a no. I don't think members in the gallery count, but all right. In that case, I'll move a motion that council nominates Councillor Carl Saladin as a member of the Metro Inner South Joint Development Assessment Panel until 26 January 2024. That's the first paragraph. The second paragraph is that the Minister for Planning be advised of the nomination of the City of South Perth's Joint Development Assessment Panel for the period ending 26 January 2024. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Choi, thank you. Well, I don't have much to say other than I'm sure Councillor Saladin will do a good job, and I thank him for putting up his hand. Councillor Choi, anything to add?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, I agree. And I also had words with Councillor Sillington because I'm one of the alternate members as well on JDAP. And I think considering he's already on there, he's already making a contribution, I think makes sense that he takes that prime position. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, does anyone wish to speak against this motion? No. Councillor Cridland?
No, but with your indulgence, I'd like to speak for it just for 1 second,
Sure.
if I may.
Go ahead.
I'd like to thank Councillor Sellerton for putting his hand up. I know he's worked hard as an alternate or deputy. And I would like to thank very much Councillor Steve Russell, who has resigned, and that's why we have a vacancy. I can certainly understand his incredible frustration at DAP meetings. I've sat on many with him. I know he has worked, as councillors will know from his many questions, and officers too, questions and comments, including the item tonight. He works very hard on planning matters, and he took his role on DAP very, very seriously. And I can certainly understand his frustration. I've left meetings similarly frustrated. I think it's important that the city and the council is represented to have some input. And I say that in the knowledge that Councillor Russell has resigned because of his frustration at the occasional, and I say that generously, refusal of the panels to take into account all of the comments, often very well considered, of elected members. So thank you, Councillor Russell, and I commend Councillor Sellerton to the new position. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the motion? Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favour? No. In that case, I'll simply, if there's nothing I wish to say by way of winding up, I'll simply put the item to the vote. And Councillor Cridland?
I vote in the affirmative.
Thank you. So that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. We now move on to, we're into confidential territory now. So before I do that, I'd like to move on to item 11, which is applications for a leave of absence. Does anyone have a leave of absence application that they wish to submit tonight? Councillor Cridland?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right. There being no applications received, we'll move on to item 12, which is, I was getting ahead of myself there in terms of the confidential stuff. Item 12, motions of which previous notice has been given. There's one, item 12.1, which is a notice of motion from Councillor Carl Sellerton entitled Waste Plan Update. Councillor Sellerton, would you like to read your notice of motion?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So my notice of motion recommendation is that a report be provided in early 2023 on the current status of the City of South Perth Waste Plan, which would include an update on discussions with the state government and its objective to achieve separate food organics, green organics waste collection and processing, a status report on the Rivers Regional Council proposed transition to become a regional subsidiary, an update in relation to completion and commissioning of the Avitas Waste-to-Energy facility and any implications for the city's future waste disposal obligations, any pertinent reports that have been prepared for the Rivers Regional Council and the administration's assessment of these, and that a workshop be held prior to the presentation of the report to Council.
Thank you very much. Have we got a seconder for Councillor Sellerton's notice of motion? Councillor Navard, thank you. Councillor Sellerton, the floor is yours.
Look, just very briefly, Mr Mayor, we're in a bit of a pickle and I'd like some information brought to Council's attention so that we can help allay some fears which are in the community. You know, everyone's asking for a third bin, but there's reasons as to why we don't have them currently, and let's lay it out on the table for everyone to see. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Navard, would you like to speak as seconder? Very good. Councillors, anyone who wishes to speak against Councillor Sullivan's notice of motion? Councillor Cridland? All right. Well, there be no one, if there's no one speaking against Councillor Sullivan's notice of motion, I'll simply declare it carried and we'll move on. That brings us to item 13, which is questions from members. Item 13.1 is responses to previous questions from members taken on notice, of which that's nil this evening. Item 13.2 is questions from members. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration this evening? Councillor D'Souza?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have some questions regarding Telstra's recent proposals to install 5G cells in certain areas of the city, and these questions have been sort of relayed to me by residents concerned about the location and obstructing their amenities. So I have forwarded these to the city, but I'll ask them now. So my first question is, why are these installations going to be located so close to a foreshore reserve? And this is for the installations in Salter Point.
Ms Lummer, should I be directing that to you?
Yes, thank you. The series of questions that Councillor D'Souza has kindly provided in advance, and I was able to then forward them on to the planning consultant who's dealing with these for Telstra, and he has responded. So the answers I read will be the responses that Telstra provided. So the three proposed small cells, each of which is a low impact facility and covers only a small area around it, are intended to serve the residential areas to the west of Salter Point Parade, with no additional network services required along the Canning River or beyond. As such, placing the small cells on existing light poles along the foreshore allows for an efficient provision of service in the area.
Thank you, Ms Lummer. Councillor D'Souza, understand you have another question?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I've got 5 in total. This is question number 2. Why are notices not forwarded to the postal addresses of all the owners along Salter Point Parade instead of being hand-delivered to certain properties?
Ms Lummer.
Yes. As occurs each time Telstra intends to deploy a small cell, the properties closest to the proposed installation are notified by way of hand-delivered letter and in accordance with the requirements of the industry code, and that's in accordance with the requirements of the industry code. Telstra does not have ready access to ownership details for individual properties, and the hand delivering of notification letter to affected properties is considered an effective communication method, complemented by the signage placed on the utility poles. Given a number of submissions and inquiries have already been received from nearby property owners, the method appears to be effective in this instance. And just a reminder, that's Telstra's words, not mine.
Thank you. Councillor D'Souza?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Ms Lummer. I do appreciate that. Why are they not located on major arterial roads where additional infrastructure would simply blend in with the visual clutter that already exists?
Ms Lummer.
Yes, small cells are small, low-powered base stations designed for the use in residential areas and cover only a very small area around them, usually a few hundred metres or so. As such, placing them well away from the area of need would not provide the network improvements sought by Telstra.
Thank you. Councillor D'Souza?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 2 to go. Is there any way Telstra can be made to reconsider the siting of these mobile phone cells?
Ms Lummer.
The location of each of the 3 small cells proposed along Salter Point Parade have been carefully selected to provide the network improvements, both coverage and network capacity, to the area, including the introduction of a reliable 5G service to the area. The deployment code consultation period runs until Thursday the 3rd of November, and the community is encouraged to seek further information or make a submission if they have concerns about the locations or small cells themselves. Telstra will consider and respond to any submissions.
Thank you. Councillor D'Souza?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Final question. What are residents' options to potentially challenge this decision?
Ms Lummer.
So what I actually asked what I asked the planning consultant to answer was residents' option in regard to this. And the answer I got from them was that, as noted above, the deployment code consultation period runs until the 3rd of November, and the community is encouraged to make a submission if they have any concerns about the proposed small cells or require further information. Telstra will consider and respond to any submissions. And just a reminder, those are not my words, but Telstra's words.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions for the administration this evening? I think Councillor Russell was first there.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I understand that the Collier Retirement Village residents did not receive support from the city for a co-funding grant for an outdoor fitness venue, and this may have been one factor why they were unsuccessful in their application to Lottery West. Hence, to this effect, I'm not asking for the reasons why support for co-funding was not given, but rather what are the mechanisms, for example, delegated authority, that applications like this, and indeed others, do not come to council for decision making?
I'm not sure who I'm sending that to. Ms Lummer, maybe?
Well, if nobody else can answer around the table, I'll take it on notice. Thank you.
Councillor Choi, I think I saw your hand go up there.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I just understand the city is currently reviewing the Standing Orders Local Law 2007. I just wanted to confirm the anticipated time frame for this review, please, and when council may expect to receive a report on the city's review outcomes with any proposed changes, including taking into account the necessary recent local government reform outcomes.
Thank you. Mr Adams?
So, thank you for the question. We commenced the review some time ago in terms of an administrative review. That review officially only commences once it comes to council. The process for the review is set out in section 3.12 of the Local Government Act and Regulation 3 of the Function and General Regulations. So we have to follow that process carefully. After we had commenced our administrative review, the government announced the reforms that were intended to be implemented, and one of those reforms was to have standard meeting procedures. Our advice has been that the bill that enacts or the legislation that enacts the reforms will be brought before Parliament in the first part of next year, and that will then tell us whether the standard meeting procedures will be imminent or whether there'll be some time away. Once we know the outcome of that, then we'll decide whether to recommence the review or wait until the standard meeting procedures come through.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillors, any further questions for the administration? Councillor Cridland?
I have no questions, thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right. In that case, we'll move on to the next item, which is item 14, new business of an urgent nature, introduced by decision of the meeting. There's nil this evening. That brings us to item 15, meeting closed to the public. So we do have item 15.1 on the agenda. That's matters for which the meeting must be closed. For all of those in the gallery, thank you for your attendance this evening. It's good to see you here. Unfortunately, we'll have to close the doors now. You're welcome to stick around and come back afterwards, but it won't be very exciting. Thank you all for your attendance, and I wish you all a good evening. And with that, I'll move a motion that the meeting be closed to the public. Could I have a seconder for that motion, please? Councillor Celadon, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Cridland?
I vote in the affirmative.
Thank you. I'm just waiting on one more vote. And that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. So for those of you who are attending via live streaming, thank you for your attendance at tonight's ordinary council meeting. The audio of this evening's meeting procedures and proceedings will be available on the city's website following the meeting. And now I'll just wait for confirmation from the governance departments that we are in closure. confirmation that we are reconnected. And are we live streaming? We are. At this point, item 15 has been resolved. I would like to welcome our State Member of Parliament, Mr Jeff Baker. Welcome. You've just come in for the very tail end of the meeting, which brings us to item 16, which is closure. Oh, right, of course, yes. So I'll do that. So we had two items that were passed behind closed doors. The first was item 15.1.1, former Manning Library, 144 Manning Road, Carrawarra. That was passed unanimously. Item 15.1.2, Councillor Code of Conduct. That was passed 6 votes to 3. Do I read out the votes, Ms Tucker? All right. So on item 15.1.1, bear with me. I'm just going to flick back through my notes here. So the officer recommendation on item 15.1.1, former Manning Library, 144 Manning Road, Carrawarra. The officer recommendation was as followed. Bear with me because it's a long one. That Council 1 does not proceed with the demolition of the old Manning Library. 2, subject to compliance with section 3.58 of the Local Government Act 1995, authorises the Chief Executive Officer to enter into a lease agreement with Be Our Guest Holdings Proprietary Limited for a portion of the building, Old Manning Library, located within Reserve 33639, 144 Manning Road, Manning, for the purpose of a community centre, including a kiosk and kitchen, under the following conditions. A, provision of a 21-year lease with a 21-year extension subject to ministerial approval. B, years 1 to 13, $1 per annum plus GST. C, year 14, $10,000 per annum plus GST. D, years 15 to 21, increasing by $5,000 per annum plus GST. E, lessee to be responsible for the full maintenance of the building, including the exclusive and non-exclusive areas. F, lessee to be responsible for all rates payable. G, the grant of the lease be subject to and conditional on Roman numeral 1, all necessary approvals being obtained under relevant legislation for the grant of the lease, and Roman numeral 2, the city obtaining consent from the Minister for Lands. 3, subject to ministerial approval, authorises the Chief Executive Officer to enter into a licence agreement with Be Our Guest Holdings Proprietary Limited for the non-exclusive areas of the redeveloped Old Manning Library building for a period that aligns to the lease agreement as per recommendation 2 above. So that was passed unanimously. And item 15.1.2, which was entitled Councillor Code of Conduct, the officer recommendation was as follows: that Council endorses the findings contained within confidential attachment A. Though that vote was 6 votes to 3. The councillors that voted in favour of that motion were myself, Mayor Greg Milner, Councillor Stephen Russell, Councillor Carl Celadon, Councillor D'Souza. Can I get that? Councillor Glenn Cridland. Have I missed anyone? And the 3 that voted against were Councillor Manolis, I think, voted for as well, didn't he? Yes. The 3 that voted against were Councillor Mary Choi, Councillor Jennifer Navard and Councillor Andre Brender-Abrandis. That concludes item 15. That brings us to item 16, which is closure. I declare this meeting closed at 7:58 p.m. Thank you all for your attendance and participation, and good night.